This is still unanswered. I'm Elena Marlowe. Today, Ohio. A stretch of interstate, a ditch on Greenlee Road, an unmarked grave in Strongsville, and decades of silent questions. These are stories of nameless bodies that, slowly, painfully, found names. But even when a name is returned, the other question often remains. Who did this? This episode is called The Ohio Unidentified Murders. Before we begin, trigger warning. We will discuss homicide, human remains, and graphic injuries. If that's difficult for you, please take care. Pause the episode. Okay, let's start in the cold mud of an Ohio ditch, April 24th, 1981. It was morning when three young men walked, or were driving, along Greenlee Road, a narrow rural lane in Newton Township, near Troy, north of Dayton. One of them, Greg, saw a tasseled buckskin jacket tossed in a ditch and said, "Take a look at that coat." Another moved closer, and then the sentence collapsed into horror. "Oh my God, there's a woman in that coat." They called police. That woman would be known to investigators as Buckskin Girl for 37 years.
Elena, it's one of those scenes that imprints on people because of small, specific details. She was lying curled, fetal position, on her right side. No shoes, no socks, but her feet were clean, no road dirt. That detail tells us she likely hadn't walked there. She'd been moved. That's an important forensic clue that shifts the investigation from local misadventure to a likely disposal site.
Her jacket made the papers, a buckskin poncho with tassels, an image that would haunt true crime message boards for decades. But there was no purse, no ID, nothing that tied her to a hometown. Autopsy told investigators she was young, late teens to early 20s, reddish hair in braids, good dental work, recently shaved legs. She was groomed. She was not anonymous in life in the way investigators imagine a transient who's never been seen.
Cause of death was violent head trauma, a lacerated liver, but strangulation was primary. Bruising on the neck, petechiae in the eyes. Time of death, roughly 48 hours prior to discovery. For the time, 1981, investigators did everything they could. Fingerprints, dental charts, a blood sample. They laid out the forensic toolkit they had then.
They put her image in local papers, released a composite. About 200 leads came in. None of them led to a name. She was buried in Riverside Cemetery as a Jane Doe, and the community, strangers really, adopted that grave, leaving flowers, visiting. For decades, she slept beneath a marker that read, "No name." For decades, she was a symbol, a life cut short and unnamed.
Then, slowly, the tools evolved. CODIS, NamUs, better reconstructions. In 2001, Miami Valley Regional Crime Lab developed a DNA profile. In 2008, the case went into NamUs. Over the years, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children produced updated three-dimensional reconstructions, but no match. It was only when genetic genealogy entered the scene, what people call the DNA Doe Project style of work, that a breakthrough became possible.
Let me stop you there, Isaiah. Can you explain, simply, what genetic genealogy did that the other systems couldn't?
Yeah, so older systems, CODIS, dental records, fingerprints, depend on the victim or a close relative already being in a database. If no one has ever been fingerprinted, or if the family never filed a missing person report, there's nothing to match. Genetic genealogy uses a different approach. We create a wide SNP-based profile, like those used by consumer DNA sites, and upload it to public databases where people have voluntarily uploaded their ancestry DNA. From there, you find distant relatives, second, third cousins, then build family trees to triangulate who the unknown person might be. It's more like genealogy than criminal forensics, and it can work even when no close relative is in any criminal database.
In Buckskin Girl's case, Marcia Lenore King, this is exactly what happened, but not without obstacles. The blood sample from 1981 had been stored unrefrigerated for decades. The DNA was degraded.
Degraded DNA is the enemy. You can get partial profiles. Sometimes only 50 to 75% of markers survive. For genealogical work, though, we don't need the exact same markers as CODIS. We need SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, which tell us ancestry segments. Private labs managed to extract enough. They uploaded to GDmatch. Volunteers from the DNA Doe project ran the matches, and in, astonishingly, roughly 4 hours, they had a likely candidate, Marcia L. King from Arkansas.
March 29, 2018. That's the day DDP volunteers identified a lead. April 9, the Miami Valley Regional Crime Lab confirmed through family DNA. April 11-12, 2018, Buckskin Girl was no longer anonymous. She was Marcia King, born June 9, 1959.
The identification brought relief and more anguish. Her father had died just months earlier, in January 2018. Her mother had kept the same phone number and house for 37 years, hoping, waiting. A brother and a half-brother had also died. The family finally learned what had become of Marcia, but they didn't get the answer to who killed her.
It's wrenching. Identification can bring a kind of closure, and it can reopen old grief. When I visited Troy years ago, I found a community that had cared for her grave as if she were their own. More than 50 locals attended the rededication service when her name was revealed. It felt like a collective, delayed act of mourning. But the killer has not been found. As of early 2026, Marcia's homicide remains unsolved.
And that's the core of the double mystery we talk about. First, who are you? Second, who killed you? Solving number one is essential to solving number two, but it doesn't guarantee it. Identifying Marcia gave detectives new leads. She had been in Louisville, Kentucky, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in March 1981, consistent with a hitchhiking cross-country life. But it didn't produce a suspect.
Now we move, because Buckskin Girl is not unique. Her story is emblematic. Another Ohio case that highlights different system failures is Linda Pagano, the Strongsville Jane Doe. Isaiah, walk us through her disappearance and what went wrong.
Linda Marie Pagano was born April 11, 1957, and lived in Akron, Ohio. On September 1, 1974, she left her stepfather's apartment after an argument and was never seen alive again. Her family reported her missing. Then, in February 1975, 3 boys found partial skeletal remains, skull and other bones, at Big Creek Reservation in Strongsville. The bones were examined, but here is where a clerical mistake did something that, to my mind, is unforgivable. The remains were never entered into searchable national or state databases. They were effectively erased from electronic memory.
Erased. The remains were buried in an unmarked grave. For decades, Linda's missing person file and the identified remains file didn't connect. It took online researchers and the era of NamUs to resurrect the case, exhume the remains, run modern testing, and finally, decades later, identify her.
This is an administrative failure with human consequences. NamUs didn't exist in 1975, and the missing link was a person failing to log the remains into whatever system existed. It meant that every detective, every cold case investigator who later searched digital databases did not find Linda. It's a reminder of how fragile these processes are. One unchecked box or one forgotten file, and you lose a life to bureaucracy.
Linda's official cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, homicide. Her stepfather was part of the context around her disappearance, but there has been no public charging. Identification answered the question of who the remains belonged to, but again, who killed Linda remains unanswered.
And in Linda's case, the stories that followed her were as much about systems as about suspects. Had those remains been logged, had they been compared with missing person reports across jurisdictions, things could have followed a different path.
I want to step back for a moment and talk about Ohio as a place in these stories. Why do so many unidentified victims, Jane and John Doe's, turn up there? It's not a conspiracy. It's geography.
Ohio is a crossroads. Interstates like I-70, I-71, I-75, and the I-80-90 corridor slice through the state. Truck stops dot those highways, and those truck routes carry people, commuters, long-haul truckers, hitchhikers across state lines. If a victim is transient or from another state, local police may have no missing person context. Bodies get dumped along ditches, in rivers, in wooded lots near highways. That makes identification harder and investigation more complicated, because you're dealing with multiple jurisdictions and records that aren't connected.
There's also the shadow of suspected serial offenders, the so-called Dr. No cases, alleged truck stop killings beginning in the 1980s and continuing through the 1990s. Some tied to an Austintown truck stop on I-80. Some victims fit the pattern, found without shoes, associated with sex work. Others, like Marcia, don't. There's often a rush to fit an unidentified body into a larger pattern, but the truth is messier.
Right. Correlation is not causation. Investigators have to be careful not to force a narrative. But the interstate factor is concrete. Bodies discovered at state arteries often came from far away. That increases the likelihood that a family didn't file a missing report or that agencies failed to cross-reference information.
So, we have physical geography and administrative geography. Both matter. And we have evolving tools. Let's do a primer for listeners who follow forensics closely. Fingerprints, dental records, CODIS, NamUs, and then genetic genealogy. Isaiah, give us the elevator tour, what each system can and cannot do.
Okay. Fingerprints are excellent, but only if the person's prints are in a database, criminal booking, military service, some government jobs. Dental records can identify a person if you know which dentist to ask and the family provides records. CODIS, the Federal Combined DNA Index System, stores STR profiles used by law enforcement. CODIS can match a decedent to a relative only if that relative's DNA is in the system. NamUs, launched in the mid-2000s, is a public database designed to link missing persons and unidentified remains nationwide. It relies on agencies to enter data. Genetic genealogy, SNP profiling, uploaded to public sites like GED Match, where users can opt in, lets us find distant relatives and build trees. Each tool helps, but each depends on good data, preserved evidence, and cross-agency cooperation.
People often see the identifications, Marcia King, Linda Pagano, and assume technology alone solved everything. But there's a more complicated truth. We rely on preserved vials, on a clerk deciding to log bones, on a family keeping a phone number for decades. Tiny decisions ripple for decades.
Exactly. In Buckskin Girl's case, someone, somewhere, preserved a blood vial. If that vial hadn't survived, even poorly, the DNA Doe project couldn't have worked. In Linda Pagano's case, a clerical failure created a blank in the system. If you look across the cases we've been talking about, a lot of identifications came down to two things: evidence preservation and institutional will.
Institutional will. That phrase keeps coming up in my reporting. Will agencies prioritize entering every case into NamUs? Will medical examiners retain tissue and blood even when they don't have immediate answers? Will counties with tight budgets fund cold case units? The answer has been inconsistent. Some counties are proactive, others are strained.
There are policy solutions. Nationwide standards could require entry of unidentified decedents into NamUs and retention of biological samples when feasible. Funding for forensic labs, because backlog means samples sit, degrade, or are never tested. And training. Files get lost not just because of laziness, but because officers and clerks simply don't know the downstream consequences of a missed checkbox.
Let's talk about the people who filled those gaps. The DNA Doe Project, NCMEX reconstructions, local volunteers, online sleuths, and communities that adopted graves. There's an uneasy alliance between citizen investigators and official law enforcement. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it harms. Isaiah, how has the relationship shifted in the last decade?
It's been a shift from suspicion to partnership in many places. Initially, law enforcement was wary of genetic genealogy and volunteers poking into cases. Over time, success stories, like Buckskin Girl, changed conversation. Some agencies now actively collaborate with organizations like DDP, and many welcome tips from online communities. But the tension remains. Agencies must manage chain of custody, legal procedures, victims' privacy. Meanwhile, online sleuths can uncover records, FOIA documents, even cemetery logs that spur action. When done ethically, public involvement can be a powerful force for accountability.
Ethical is the operative word. We've seen cautionary episodes where online investigators publicly accused people with little evidence. Families get dragged into forums and gossip. We need passion, but matched with restraint.
Correct. And there's the broader privacy debate, too. Using public genealogy databases to solve violent crimes saves lives and solves mysteries, but critics worry about the implications. Should someone's distant relative consent to their DNA being used to build a family tree that could implicate a suspect? There are trade-offs between privacy and justice.
On that front, some databases like GED Match have tightened opt-in rules for law enforcement use. There's also a legislative conversation. What are acceptable boundaries? What about cold cases where the victim or their family wanted to remain remote from public scrutiny? These are not easy questions.
No, and there's another practical limit worth mentioning. Not all remains can be identified. Many cases were cremated, many tissues were discarded, many bones degraded. Even the best techniques require material to analyze. Time is both enemy and ally. It wears evidence away, but it also gives us scientific tools that didn't exist at the time of death. What we do now needs to be forward-thinking. Preserve, catalog, and share.
I want to tell you a short story about a town and a grave that people looked after. When I went to Riverside Cemetery in Troy, community members told me they felt responsible for Jane Doe. They brought flowers, wrapped the grave in winter, and sometimes left letters. They didn't know her, but they honored her. When she became Marcia, those same neighbors, people who had no biological connection, sat with her family and cried. There's something profound about that.
It's a human response to namelessness. We don't like anonymous suffering. Caring for the grave is a small act of rehumanization, reminding the world that she was somebody.
Let's open up for a little Q&A, Isaiah. I want to go deeper into the science for listeners who love the technical detail. Walk me through, step by step, what the DNA Doe Project did to identify Marcia King, what the lab did with degraded DNA, and how investigators confirmed the match.
Sure. Step 1. Locate preserved biological material. In Marcia's case, an old blood vial existed. Step 2. Extraction. The lab used specialized extraction protocols for degraded DNA, methods that maximize recovery of short fragments. Step 3. SNP genotyping. Instead of STR markers used for CODIS, the lab produced an SNP profile compatible with consumer kits. Step 4. Upload to GEDmatch or similar, where users have allowed law enforcement or research use. The profile returns a list of genetic relatives with centimorgan values indicating relatedness. Step 5. Genealogical tree building. Volunteers, genealogists, and investigative genealogists analyze the matches, identify common ancestors, build descendants trees, and narrow down on likely individuals by age, sex, and geographic movements. Step 6. Law enforcement obtains a direct relative's DNA, usually via a consensual cheek swab, and runs a confirmatory test in a forensic lab. Only after lab confirmation do investigators move publicly.
It's astonishing. Part science, part detective work. But it also depends on cooperation. The databases, the volunteer genealogists, labs willing to extract degraded DNA, and law enforcement following legal steps to confirm. One weak link and the chain breaks.
Exactly. And I'll add a practical caution. Genetic genealogy doesn't always give a neat answer. Sometimes you get dozens of matches scattered across multiple branches. It can be like trying to assemble a jigsaw where half the pieces are missing. It takes time, patience, and humility from both scientists and investigators.
Humility.
Yeah, because we're entering family histories, often with trauma attached. We must respect those boundaries.
Let's widen the lens. We've told two stories, Marcia King and Linda Pagano, but there are dozens of other Ohio does found in rivers, ditches, woods, and sometimes charred or skeletonized. Many were young. Many were last seen near truck stops. Some fit a pattern, some don't. I want to read a few snapshots, and then we'll discuss what they reveal. A body found along the Interstate with a white tank top and no shoes. A skeletonized woman found beneath a bridge with no dental records. A teenage boy pulled from a river whose clothing suggested he'd been traveling from a southern state. A charred torso that thwarted all usual identification methods. These are not just headlines. They are lives, each with a family that may or may not know to look in Ohio.
And for investigators, each snapshot raises logistical problems. Which ME's office handles the case? Which county? Where should evidence be sent? Jurisdictional wrangling can slow everything. That's why national databases and consistent protocols are so important. Without them, cases fall through administrative cracks.
You mentioned earlier the concept of ambiguous loss, families not able to grieve because they don't have confirmation. How does that play out in Ohio cases?
Ambiguous loss is devastating. Imagine a parent who doesn't know if their child is alive, or in worse cases, knows the child is dead but doesn't know where they are buried. That limbo prevents rituals of mourning. When someone is identified after decades, the family can grieve in a different way. But it's complicated. There's relief, anger, and a new pain of confirmed homicide. That emotional complexity matters to investigators too. Families often become allies in the search for answers, but they need sensitivity and support.
Speaking of families as allies, if you're listening and you suspect a relative may have been involved in one of these cases, how should you proceed? There's a right way and a wrong way.
Right way. Contact the local law enforcement agency handling the case, or NamUs. Share what you know, and if asked, provide DNA through proper channels. Wrong way? Post accusations publicly without evidence, harass people, or provide coerced or contaminated DNA samples. Respect the investigation protocols. Many detectives appreciate tips, and properly collected family DNA can be the final piece to confirm an ID.
And a reminder, if you have a loved one missing, no matter how long ago, file a missing person report if one was never filed. Keep records, photographs, dental paperwork, any old medical records. Those things can make the difference between a nameless grave and a closed file.
Absolutely. And if your loved one was an adult who left by choice, it still helps to register a missing person. People travel and sometimes don't come home. There might be a connection to an unidentified decedent that only becomes apparent years later when more data is available.
We've been focused on the science and the failures, but I want to close with a note about justice and about memory. Naming someone, restoring a name to a grave, is a moral act. It's the first step toward accountability. It's also a reminder that our systems are not infallible, and they demand vigilance.
I like to end these conversations thinking about the progress that is possible. In Ohio, we've seen John and Jane Does become Marcia King and Linda Pagano because of persistence from advocates, scientists, and communities. That's hope. But hope without systemic change isn't enough. We need policies that mandate preservation and data sharing, funding for labs, and training for clerks and investigators, so fewer cases fall into administrative limbo.
For listeners who want to help, there are concrete steps. Support organizations like the DNA Doe Project, donate to forensic labs or memorial funds that help families, and pressure local and state officials to adopt NamUs as a standard practice. If you're a genealogist, consider volunteering your skills ethically. If you have information about a missing person, contact local law enforcement or NamUs. And if you're in Ohio and you know a cemetery with unmarked graves, sometimes even the small act of cataloging them matters.
And for those of you who are comforted by details, check NamUs. Search your state's unidentified decedent listings. Sometimes family members find that their missing relative matches a Doe because recognition can come from the most unexpected place.
Before we go, Isaiah, what keeps you going in this work? What keeps you showing up to boxes of bones and degraded vials?
Two things. First, the human element. Every bone, every vial is someone's story. Being able to translate a lab result into a person's name so a family can begin to grieve or a community can reclaim someone, that's deeply meaningful. Second, the science itself. It's rapidly evolving. New methods make previously impossible identifications possible. There's a humility in the work, too. Science can't fix everything, but it can honor people. That matters.
That humility and the communities that refuse to forget. Marcia's mother keeping the same phone number. Neighbors caring for Jane Doe's grave. Online volunteers sifting through old police blotters. Those small acts are how identities return. They are how names come back to the dead. If you have tips, if you have memories, if you want to support this kind of work, visit stillunansweredpod.com for resources, links to NamUs, the DNA Doe Project, and guidance on how to contact investigators. Thank you to Dr. Isaiah Chen for joining me. Isaiah, any last words?
Keep asking questions. Keep insisting that no one be left anonymous because of paperwork or oversight. And when you find a lead, share it responsibly. It's the best way to honor those who are still waiting for answers.
This has been Still Unanswered. I'm Elena Marlowe. For Marcia, for Linda, for all the nameless who deserve a name. We'll be back next week with another case. Till then, take care of one another.